Okay, class, we're back for part 2 of Chapter 3 Sensitivity Analysis. Where we left off is we want to now look at the sensitivity report that was generated using Excel Solver. And let's jump over to that now. Recall we got that from selecting the sensitivity report within the Solver results window. So here's the sensitivity report, and I want to just walk us through the meaning of everything. So here are the adjustable cells. Another way of saying that would be controllable cells or decision variables, and their final value is 5 and 3. Final could be another word for optimal. The reduced cost is something that was in chapter 2, but I want to go ahead and explain that. The reduced cost is basically the change in the coefficient of that decision variable that would be necessary in order for that decision variable to become part of the solution. Well, both of these decision variables are in fact part of the solution. We are producing 5 and 3 respectively of product 1 and 2. So that's a 0. Nothing has to happen to the coefficient in order for that to become part of the solution. Well, let's look at that and make some more sense out of it. Let's come back to sheet 1 here. Let's look at my coefficients in my objective function. There are 5 and 7. And let's say that if instead of a 7 there was let's say a 200 here. So what that would mean in reality is I make $5 on product 1 and I make $200 on product 2. Well, intuitively you might think to yourself, well, if that were the case, I would probably use all of my resources to produce product 2 because there's so much profit there. And I'd probably just ignore product 1. Well, let's see if that is in fact the case. I'm going to solve this again, changing that to 200. I'm going to hit Solver. Oops, need to hit Enter. Let's hit Solver, Solve, and there you go. You should see, I'm going to look at the sensitivity analysis here as well. Okay. Now, what happened when I did that? Well, as you might expect, we don't produce anything of product 1 because the profits relative to product 2 are pretty tiny. And I just produced product 2. Okay? Now, let's look at the reduced costs in this scenario. Okay? Now, the final value for X1 was 0. In other words, we're not going to produce any product 1 because we can make so much money producing product 2. And now let's look at this 128 and a third, and let's make sense of that. Essentially what that is telling us is that the profit per unit of X1 would have to go up by 128 and a third dollars before this final value would be anything other than 0. Okay? So if we raise it 128, this is still going to be a 0. If we raise this by 129, the coefficient that is, it's going to be something other than 0. So let's prove that to ourselves. I want to raise the coefficient in front of X1 by 128. Okay. Let's see here. So instead of 5, we're going to put 133. Now, I'm going to solve it again. And you see it's still the same. Okay? Now let's go back in here and let's make this 134 beyond the threshold, beyond that reduced cost. Solve it again, and now it becomes part of the solution again. Okay? That's the meaning of that reduced cost. That's what would have to happen to that coefficient before that particular decision variable would again be part of our solution. What I want to do now is change this back to what it was. It was 5 and 7. Enter. Let's solve it. Okay, keep the solver solution. Okay, so that's the meaning of a reduced cost. They were originally, when we first solved it, 0 because neither one of these was 0. Okay? Now, you've got the objective coefficient, the 5 and the 7. And then we have an allowable increase and allowable decrease. Now this will indicate how robust our solution is. Okay? How robust our solution is. Now what this means is, as long as that 5 is between a 4.67 and a 7, then the solution, the 5 and the 3, will stay the same. Okay? Where did I come up with 4.67? Well, the allowable decrease to that 5 is 0.333. So if you decrease 5 by 0.333, you've got 4.67. And the allowable increase is 2. So if you add 2 to this, you've got 7. Now if you look at the 7, the allowable increase is 0.5, so you could go all the way to 7.5. The allowable decrease is 2, so you could go all the way down to 5. Now what this is telling me is how robust is my solution? How sensitive is my assumption? Or I should say it differently. How sensitive is my solution to my assumption that that 5 is correct? Does that make sense? So let's test that out. It should be the case that if this 5 stays between 4.67 and 7, this solution stays the same. Okay? Let's test that. Let's take it up by, or let's take it down by a half. Let's go to 4.5 and see if this changes. Okay? We're going to take the 5 down by 0.5. Oops. There we go. So that'll, if that becomes a 4.5, I would expect the new solution to change from 5 and 3 to something different. And in fact, it did. Okay, now let's go back and let's change that back to a 5. Okay, and the solution will be the same. If I change it by less than a third, let's make it 4.8. That's within the limits, so the solution should remain the same, and you see it does. Now when I say the solution, I'm talking about the course of action, the number of product 1 and product 2 to produce. The profit, of course, did change because we're making a little less money on part of them. Okay. So that's the meaning there. Let's hit OK. Let's get things back to the way they were. So this is a way to test your assumptions and say, you know, what if I can't get $5 out of every product 1? And you realize it's fairly sensitive, because if you have to discount that product and have a profit of $4.67 or less, then you take a different course of action altogether. You actually don't even produce any of product 1. So our solution is fairly sensitive to that 5 you see there. Okay, let's go back to the sensitivity report. I'm going to have to break up the video again to keep these relatively small. So in the third of 3 videos here, we're going to talk about these constraints, these right-hand sides, and shadow prices, etc. So that's what's coming up next.